quotes, infused with the scent of potpourri, films we commit to memory. Crossing the felt ropes, watching from home on my TV, looking at all my eyes can see. They tell me I view obsessively.
Hello and welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. We're a weekly podcast that reviews one or two new release titles every episode with an occasional free-for-all segment at the end that we call Potpourri. You can find more of our work, including written reviews, full episode show notes, and the complete backlog of our episodes at obsessiveviewer.com. You can also write into the show by emailing me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And if you'd like to support us and get access to hundreds of exclusive episodes and reviews, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you can get access to content at any of our tier levels on a recurring monthly subscription basis, or you can buy individual collections a la carte in the Patreon shop section. This week on Patreon, I'm doing my Flanagan Fridays, of course. I'm coming up on sort of toward the end of The Haunting of Hill House, which I think is a brilliant masterpiece of television. It is blowing my mind. I haven't watched it. It's been like came out 5 years ago, and I'm watching each episode for the first time, and it's blowing my mind. I am also a bit behind on my Sci-Fi Saturdays series. I'm still reviewing Foundation, but I'm a little bit behind, but those reviews are up. And starting tonight or tomorrow, I'm going to do episode reviews of Shogun on FX/Hulu. Very excited about that. And the other thing I want to talk about with Patreon really quick is that last week on the show, if you listen to the episode, I did a live stream of myself recording it because it was a solo episode, and I just wanted to dabble with like live streams. And I think that in the future, I might do that with some regularity at some point, especially when I do like solo episodes. But what I'm going to do is post those live streams on Patreon. So if you want to get notified or see the live streams, you can join Patreon. You can join Patreon at the free level. So it just gives you like emails when I go live and everything. And so do that if you want to watch me make an ass of myself on camera. So once again, you can sign up for Patreon, either free or paid, at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And yeah, so I am your host, Matt Hurt, and you can find me on social media and Letterboxd at the username of Obsessive Viewer. And this week on the show, in our featured review, we'll be reviewing Ethan Coen's latest movie, his first solo outing, fictional solo outing, Drive Away Dolls, which opened in theaters on February 23rd. And for this week's secondary review, we're going to be reviewing Monolith, which is currently available on VOD and streaming on Hoopla. And joining me tonight for our featured review is my friend and IFJ colleague, Brent Leuthold, who can be followed on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/awakenthedark. You can also read his reviews and find his podcast at awakenthedark.com. And later in the show, I'll be joined by my friend and colleague, Joe Shearer, who can be followed on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Joe R. Shearer. In that, we're going to be doing our review of Monolith there later in the show. That was a clean intro. So we'll talk to Joe about all of his stuff later. But for now, Brent, welcome back to the show. How have you been?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've been doing great. Just nice. Consuming the movies, doing the thing.
Yes, nice. Yeah. I do want to say I haven't listened to it yet, but you successfully brought back Awake in the Dark, the podcast.
That's right, it's back.
Yes, episode 79 with our friend Ben Sears. You guys talked about the 2024 Oscar nominees. How'd that go, and how excited are you for the Oscars and everything?
I'm excited. I blew through my monthly storage limit on Libsyn for one podcast. Nice. It was like 2 hours and 20 minutes, but it was well worth it. Yeah, nice. Ben and I usually talk about Oscars. He calls it the most wonderful time of the year, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. And we went through all the categories. We did it, and predictions, preferences, and then if we had overlooked picks, things like that. So stuff that wouldn't have a snowball's chance in hell. Those are things we kind of just threw out there for every category, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. And yeah, excited for the Oscars. Don't really know what to expect. Apparently Ryan Gosling is going to be performing I'm Just Ken, so that's cool.
I saw that, yeah.
That'll be fun to watch him do that. And yeah, I don't really know. I usually don't go into the telecast knowing very much. As much as we know about like all the awards and the nominations and everything, I don't know. More and more, I just feel like I've been going in just like, yeah, I don't know. Like it'll be whatever it is, and then hopefully, you know, it'll be surprises and no one will get slapped, and you know, it's just like it'll be a good time. I don't know.
Either no one will get slapped, no one will say the wrong name of the movie, no one will mispronounce someone's name. Was the Adele Dazeem thing? Was that at the Oscars, or was that? I think it was the Oscars, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think it was him introducing her for performing Let It Go, which would have been in 2014 for original song, if I had to guess. So
wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So who knows what's going to happen at the Oscars, but what will happen is that if you're listening to this, you will listen to Awake in the Dark, episode 79. If you want to. I don't want to put that pressure on you guys, but I highly recommend it. And then elsewhere on awakeinthedark.com, you have reviews of Drive Away Dolls, right? You posted a review? Yes. Yep. And then Madam Web, Lisa Frankenstein, Argyle. So you've been a busy little film critic there.
Lisa Frankenstein is now POVD as of today, apparently.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that. Huh.
Yeah, so pretty quick turnaround. So that was earlier this month?
yeah. Jeez. So, well, I am going to bring that up in Potpourri at the end of the episode. I hope I remember to mention that it's on that is on VOD now. If I forget to mention that, don't worry about it, guys, because you guys heard it here. At this point in the episode. So like usually I do news before the reviews and everything, but I don't have anything. And since you are not going to be here for the secondary review, I wanted to give you your own little potpourri section here, Brent. What have you watched lately, and how have you felt about it?
So besides Driveway Dolls, I did catch the early IMAX screening of Dune Part 2, which was Sunday the 25th, so a couple days ago from when we're recording this. And it was a pretty packed house. I saw it here in Fort Wayne. They did have the popcorn buckets out, and they kind of made it almost seemed like a trick or treat bucket sort of thing, like put your hand in if you dare. It's like, I think that kind of fundamentally misunderstands why people were talking about the Dune popcorn bucket. But regardless, they did have it out, and I snapped a photo because I thought it was funny. This is the follow-up, Denis Villeneuve's follow-up to Dune Part 1, I guess, retroactively. This was supposed to come out in November of 23 and is coming out a few months later, unfortunately. But it was wonderful. I don't know. It's very, I feel like it's pretty different from Part 1 in that it's a lot more plot dense. Well, I would say sort of, the Part 1 definitely like sets the stage, and I feel like Part 2 is just really kind of like it really moves. Like, I mean, it's 2 hours 45, but I mean, it really packs a lot sort of in there, and they do introduce different characters and new like worlds and different sort of things there. But it was terrific. I was a huge fan of the first one. I've not read the book. So watching these movies is like, it's like me watching Star Wars again, or watching Star Wars for the first time, because it's like, I don't know, like, that Darth Vader is Luke's father. And I'm sorry if there are people watching who don't know that either. But, like, I don't know, like, like I didn't know the things that were going to happen story-wise until I saw it. So, so it was pretty neat. Compared to other sort of hero's journey tales or trilogies or whatever, I will say I really like the moral ambiguity that the movies seem to tap into, that I would assume is also from the novels. So, if you have like, Frodo is tasked with bringing the ring to Mordor and, putting it in the ring. And like, it's the whole way we know we're like rooting for him. He's going to have obstacles and blah, blah, blah. Or, Luke is going to do whatever. It's more of a straight line and nothing wrong with those, movies. That's awesome. Sure. And they're great films. But I like from this story's perspective that it's very much not a linear sort of thing morally. And I thought that was really, I thought that really carried out well through Timothée Chalamet's performance. I think it's the best performance he's given so far.
Nice.
I
like
think
overall?
Yeah.
Oh,
wow. I can't think of a performance of his that I think is better than what he does in part two with what Paul goes. I mean, I don't want to like. People in the book who have read the books, they probably know from what wasn't in part one with what will be in part two, and probably what to expect now with Dune Messiah. But it's quite something. I think it's really a different kind of performance than he's even giving in part one. There's just a lot of transformation there and growth, and I didn't know with this movie, like, I know that this is part one and part two of Dune, the book, but I know that there are other Dune books.
Yeah.
But it really seems like Dune Messiah is going to be the third in this movie trilogy. So I just want to make people aware going into this that, like, Zendaya's character even says that in this. It's like, this isn't over or something.
Okay.
Kind of how she said this is only the beginning at the end of part one. She has a line that's like that. That's like, this isn't the end or something like that. And I have to imagine that's Denis sort of kind of winking a little bit. Yeah. It's not like hammy or anything, but
she doesn't like stare at the camera and say like, no, there's going to be a third movie.
There's going to be a third one. Yeah. You're going to help us with that, right, audience? So I don't know the contents of Messiah. I don't know what comes up in that book. So I'm kind of, flying blind, but I just want to say, like, part two does not end like conclusively with saying like, oh, this is the end of Dune, the book. It's very much like, no, we're going to have a third chapter to wrap this up.
Nice.
So I just feel like it's good for people to know that because, we're having quite a few movies now in these franchises that, it's kind of in limbo with like if they're going to wrap things up. Of course, we had that with like Across the Spider-Verse. With that it's that was something where it's like we kind of knew there was going to be a trilogy, but man, it's a really big cliffhanger on that.
Yeah.
And then Dead Reckoning, which retroactively now is not a part one,
right?
So it's sort of like this whole thing. So I just want to be clear: if you're seeing part two, I'm just saying, don't expect it to totally end conclusively. Having said that, it is immensely satisfying.
Nice.
So I'm pretty sure my friend Paul, not Atreides, unfortunately, is going to be on Awake in the Dark sometime in early March, and we'll talk about it more extensively. Nice. But
so you can max out the Libsyn storage space for March,
right? Yeah, we're gonna have to do a part one and part two for that one too, I imagine. But I was blown away. I think what Denis is doing with these is, it's like him and Chris Nolan. I mean, they're like the only two that are doing like this kind of movie making on this scale and also doing it really, really, really well. Yeah, there's a lot of integrity and creativity.
Yeah, I haven't seen Dune Part 2, but like I'm seeing it Thursday. So the day, like when you guys are listening to this, the day it comes out, if you guys are listening to this, the day it comes out, I'm seeing Dune today. Leap Day, happy Leap Day. But I have full faith in Denis Villeneuve, and it's just something that I've talked about, and I talked about it in our Dune review and past episodes and everything, that I remember just reading that he was talking about how Dune is his passion project. He has been a huge fan of Dune, the property, for his like entire life. This is the thing that he's been building toward. And like he said something to the effect of Arrival and Blade Runner 2049 were like the test runs to make Dune, and I'm just like, it blows my mind. Like, two of the best sci-fi movies that I've seen in recent years, one of which being a Lego sequel to a beloved massive property, and like these are test runs for him to do his passion project.
Right.
Like that the context of that blows my mind a little bit. But I've seen the first Dune a few times now, and I really I warmed up to it the second time I saw it, and then did a commentary track on Patreon actually. But I can't wait to watch Dune Part 2. Yeah. And I can't wait to see what pushes the third movie whenever it comes out, what pushes that out of its original release date window, because Dune was postponed because of COVID. Dune Part 2, the strikes. We'll see what happens with Dune.
Some
Messiah,
other
Dune
unmitigated, unforeseen disaster.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, the world is conspiring to take down this trilogy, and I can't do it.
Nope.
Can't do it.
Denny's too strong. Too strong.
Yes.
Yeah.
He is.
Well, that's great. And of course, I believe you will also have a review of Dune Part 2 up, I'm sure, probably.
Yes. Yeah, that'll be my written review for next week.
Nice.
And podcast episode, early March.
Nice. Well, check that out, guys. When that comes out, go to awakenthedark.com. So, anything else, or should we go into our featured review for the evening?
No. Yeah, we can drive right into Driveway.
Nice. All right. So, of course, we're going to do a non-spoiler review and spoiler review for Drive Away Dolls, which is currently playing in theaters. To bring us into the spoiler review, I'll play a clip from the trailer. But for now, we're just going to do a non-spoiler review. Like I said, it's in theaters. Was released on February 23rd, so last week. And the premise is Jamie regrets her breakup with her girlfriend while Marion needs to relax. In search of a fresh start, they embark on an unexpected road trip to Tallahassee. Things quickly go awry when they cross paths with a group of inept criminals. Director was Ethan Coen. Writers were Ethan Coen and Trisha Cook, who I believe is his wife. Is that right, Dina? Yeah,
that's correct.
And the cast includes Margaret Qualley, Geraldine Viswanathan, Beanie Feldstein, Joey Slotnick, CJ Wilson, and Coleman Domingo. Also, Pedro Pascal, Matt Damon, and other people. So Brent, so in non-spoilers, how did you feel going into Drive Away Dolls, and what did you think of the movie?
I generally liked it a good bit. This being Ethan Coen's first technically fictional. He did a Jerry Lee Lewis documentary called Trouble in Mind that premiered at Cannes in June of 22, and then kind of just sat there. No one really, like, A24 technically picked it up, but they did not release it really, and it actually had a very, very quiet, unannounced release on Amazon Prime earlier this month. And by that, I mean, I literally saw it on Just Watch, like, Trouble in Mind. Isn't that the Ethan Coen documentary that he did about Jerry Lee Lewis from like a year and a half ago? So I watched it and kind of realized why A24 didn't do anything with it, because it's not especially good. His wife, Trisha Cook, edited it. My understanding is that this was kind of a COVID project. Okay. It is not a long documentary. It's like 75 minutes long. But it doesn't really say that much. Like, if you're going to do a documentary about Jerry Lee Lewis, like, there's kind of some stuff to, a mess of wires to kind of untangle. And like, not only does it not do that, but it doesn't really even like, it doesn't really, it's not a talking heads documentary, which is fine, but like, it's literally just footage from like interviews that he did, and then performances. A lot of it, like half of it, is just performances he did. And it's like, okay, I don't know. It's just not a very good documentary. It was kind of unfortunate. So I didn't go into Drive Away Dolls with like comparing it to, because they're just two kind of different efforts. But Drive Away Dolls is definitely more more fun, more in the traditional sort of Coen's sort of speed.
Yeah.
Joel's solo effort was the tragedy of Macbeth. Came out a few years ago, and that's of course Shakespearean, black and white. Very very buttoned up, that sort of thing. Driveway Dolls is not that, so it's very much it's kind of fun watching the Coen brothers if they are going to part ways, which is sad, and hopefully they'll come back together as is rumored. If they're going to part ways, it's fun to watch them do two totally different projects. So that was kind of the context by which I enjoyed Driveway Dolls.
Nice. What's funny? I didn't really know anything about the movie going into it. I didn't see the trailer. I just knew that it was Ethan Coen and caper comedy of sorts. And I was pretty pleasantly surprised with it. I think that the chemistry between Margaret Qualley and Geraldine Viswanathan is really great as this just balancing act of these two kind of not polar opposite people, but these two people that are just with very different outlooks on what they're doing and what they should do and what it happens. But the kind of silliness that comes into play with the plot and the story is a lot of fun. It was very fun and energetic. Plus, it's a pretty short movie. It's less than 90 minutes, I think. It's quick and breezy. I enjoyed it. I just didn't know really what to expect from it, and that's always kind of a nice surprise. What I didn't, I'll save that for spoilers, but there are elements to it that I felt really propelled the story forward in fun ways that were unexpected, namely the two henchmen characters. The comic relief of those two was, I don't know, it was a lot of fun. And when it reaches a certain point there, I was just kind of blown away by just how off the wall it was. And I don't know, I really enjoyed the energy of this movie. I'll say that.
It reminded me a little bit of Fargo the series, and that that first season was a remix of Fargo. This kind of feels like a remix of a few different kind of Coen brothers movies. You can sort of have that feel with the two henchmen that you mentioned. They have a different vibe than the henchmen in Fargo, but when they're on it's also a road movie, so you kind of get part of that. This doesn't take place in Arizona, but there's definitely some of that Raising Arizona sort of kookiness, the fact of them kind of, it's like a road movie, so you have that sort of thing. So it has those traditional Coen brothers themes. It has kidnapping, you get some blackmail, you get some misunderstandings, and characters with kind of goofy names, and just kind of faces pop up that it's you would expect to see them in a Coen brothers movie. So it's sort of, I don't know, for me it's kind of comfort food. I rewatched a few Coen brothers movies. I've kind of in honor of Driveway Dolls, I had there were a couple I hadn't seen, the Lady Killers and Intolerable Cruelty, and then there were just some others that I watched, Raising Arizona, Blood Simple, to do a Coen brothers ranking, including their solo efforts. Nice. Just I figured to kind of bundle it all in or whatever, but so I think I sort of had their filmography on my mind. And I don't know with the people who aren't responding to this, and I don't want to sound like a snob, but I don't know if maybe it's just folks that aren't as familiar with their, I guess I would say, their brand. Style. Their style. Where it's just sort of this is, I don't like the, it's I get, I mean, and especially if it's, perhaps the, the more puritanical of the Gen Zs, will tell you now, this is a very sex positive movie. It is not ashamed to be very out there with that. So who knows if people object to it on those moral grounds, that's kind of its own thing.
Yeah. From my understanding, the original title was Driveway Dykes. Was that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it is a very, like you said, is a very sex positive, very LGBTQ friendly movie, but it doesn't like that. It's not driven by that. It's just this. It's this fun, goofy, heightened humor, heightened reality, to an extent, and just like I don't know how to talk about it without really spoiling it, but like when like the MacGuffin is revealed, I was just like, I was so not expecting anything after that.
It's a really fun reveal. I mean, when you find out essentially there's a briefcase that they have in the trunk of their car that is this drive-away service, which I guess that's a thing. I've never heard of it, but you have essentially, you drive a car from one place to another and you don't have to pay the rental fee, is my understanding. And the two characters here are short on cash, so they say, okay, let's hit the road. But of course, unbeknownst to them, they have this briefcase in the trunk, and it's filled with, that has something that, you know, we won't say in non-spoilers, but it's a very funny reveal, the way that that all plays out, for sure.
Yeah. What did you think of the kind of psychedelic interludes between scenes that, it's I don't even know if you'd say it's explained later in the movie, but how did you feel about that as like kind of an overall aesthetic that it was presenting us with? Because I was a little thrown off by them a little bit, but once it kind of clicked together toward the end, I was like, yeah, I'm cool with it. But I don't know if you had any thoughts on it.
Yeah, a lot of this movie to me sort of calls back to sort of counterculture movies from the 60s and like late 60s, early 70s. So the one I was thinking about a lot was, you know, Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, like the Russ Meyer stuff, a lot of the kind of the like John Waters stuff for sure, and either the kind of like exploitation stuff from that era. So kind of going into that with the story, like besides the psychedelic stuff, when those scenes came in, I was like, okay, well, they're doing sort of the campier stuff from those. I think Faster Pussycat, has, you know, I think it has like a trip out sequence and stuff. And you have all sorts of movies from that era, whether, you know, whatever, 2001: A Space Odyssey or you know, Willy Wonka, you know, that have like all these creepy, trippy, weird scenes that are kind of brought in. So I was just like, you know, you just sort of take it. I kind of figured that was for the aesthetic. But of course they do, there's a few of them, and they do matter, and they do come into the plot. Again, in a very Coen Brothers way. It reminded me too, speaking of Coen Brothers movies, The Big Lebowski. There's these trippy scenes in that movie where, you know, whatever, in the bowling alley or where he's flying and stuff like that. And I assume that's just straight out of, they are decidedly more psychedelic in this film. But again, I sort of took that to be more the aesthetic, and they are flashback sequences. So it would have been back in that time.
That's true. Yeah, that's fair. It's so funny because like I did not do my due diligence and rewatch any Coen Brothers movies before this. And it's just so, when you put it into context of the similarities between like this and Fargo and Big Lebowski, like drawing those comparisons just really solidifies this as a very Coen brother movie.
Right.
Which is also interesting because that's in kind of stark contrast to like the tragedy of Macbeth. Right. But it's just interesting to see Ethan Coen kind of in his wheelhouse with this. But in terms of the henchmen, I didn't make the connection or I didn't draw a parallel to them from the guys in Fargo. That's a really good comparison because that bickering aspect between them in this movie there's this fun, goofy energy to it that even though the movie goes to some relatively serious places, and gets to the point where, like, yes, this is this type of road movie where there's an object that people who are willing to kill people are wanting to get, and these two people who have this object are not aware that they are, you know, in the crosshairs, or they don't know the extent of how dangerous their situation is. As those like kind of parallel storylines kind of converge and they realize like, oh, we're in a serious situation. Like, this is a very dramatic thing. The movie brings us into that drama, brings us into that kind of thriller and fear for people's lives kind of aesthetic, but it still sustains or still contains that energy, that kind of not even silly, but like that kind of just pulpy energy, really. And
right.
And the, I don't know, and just the energy that both Margaret Qualley and Geraldine Viswanathan brought to the movie is fantastic. And is able to carry that through even the more serious moments to keep it more entertaining throughout those scenes.
Yeah, I think Margaret Qualley is a really good casting choice here. I'm a little worried that I was thinking between this and like Once Upon a Time. It's just Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and like, I don't know. I don't know if she's going to fall into this like sort of like hippie chick, you know, sort of like perpetually like horny. I don't know, but I do think she's a good actress. But it was just funny. I was thinking back, and she doesn't have like a ton of credits to her name. I know she's married to Jack Antonoff, the crazy famous producer. But I do think she's talented, but I think she's a really good fit for this.
Yeah.
I said in my review, like, she definitely has some of that HI energy from Raising Arizona. It's, you know, not as good as like Nicolas Cage's performance in that movie, but she's tapping into that same kind of like really sort of like flying by the seat of her pants, sort of like, she has like I think a Texan accent in this technically, but I mean, she just has like a Southern accent, generally, it could be said, and a lot of funny stuff. And Geraldine Viswanathan,
I think.
Yeah, Viswanathan, very good. She's wonderful as well. She's another one that I first saw her, I believe, in Blockers, or at least first remember her in Blockers, and everything she's been in since then, I thought she's been really extraordinary. And nice comedic foil, nice sort of, she's more sort of, buttoned up and more restrained. Margaret Qualley's character is very much like, bringing women back to the motel and,
free
just,
spirit.
Constantly. And I love the names of the lesbian bars that they go to, like the She Shed, and like Sugar and Spice. It's like all of these like 3-word like bars that are like, this takes place in 1999, but it's like, so I don't know if there would be even more now. I have no idea, but there was just very much that sort of sort of road movie sort of vibe to it. And I do have to say, this has been like a banner month for like between Sydney Sweeney and Madame Web and Geraldine in this movie of like making really obviously attractive women not look ugly, but like put the glasses on them and like kind of the frumpier clothes. And it's like, you're not fooling anyone. Of course, I mean, it's more egregious in Madame Web because there's so many things about the movie that are terrible. And it's not as egregious in this movie. And there is, I mean, there is a relationship that develops, and she changes as the movie goes on. But I thought that was funny early on. I'm like, because they even make a joke about how formally she's dressed at this juke joint or whatever. And it's, that just came to mind. I was like, oh yeah, it's like, you're not, she's got the paint on the overalls, the whole not another teen movie thing. Ponytail.
Ponytail, paint on the overalls. What is that?
It is funny. Just like, I mean, these are good looking people, and they have to pretend that they're not.
They have to, like you said, frump them up, and she is very like you said, kind of buttoned down, and she's like the straight man in the comedy duo here. And I do like that they don't make her quite as much of a like drag on the plot or anything. Like they're equal parts in this story, and in like there's never a point where, at least for me, there was never a point where I was siding with one or the other, or I was like, okay, why doesn't she just, let her hair down and be more free spirited, or like, why doesn't she just stop fucking everyone and just like takes the thing seriously? Like, it was a good balance between those two. And I think they were great together. And yeah, Margaret Qualley, like, even with like the accent, like, I'm not someone who gets hung up on accents or anything, but she's clearly doing like an exaggerated accent. Like, it's clearly like an over the top accent, but I think that it really is like, it's very clear that she knows like what movie she's in, and like it's intentionally so, because it's such a heightened reality in this movie that you need to have like a big accent or a big kind of like a big performance out of the free spirit character. So I don't know. I just think
that was one thing. That was one thing too. Again, this being sort of a road movie and me thinking about Raising Arizona, it did have that sort of Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner thing, and she's kind of like beeping, like, because one thing that kind of bugged me about the movie, and this is one of those things that just happens in the movie, and you're just like, all right, these are choices, are the scene transitions, which I just thought were like, all right, a little too on the nose. Where they like the screen like flips around and like screeches, and another frame comes in. It's like, it's just kind of a little too much. And I think that's what they're doing there, is sort of a very like Looney Tunes sort of like, again, like going back to like the 60s sort of thing, where it's very cartoony, and it's like, it's fine. And honestly, maybe that won't even bother people, but I was just like, that's a little too much, but
I did
maybe some
not
people really love that.
Yeah, I did not think of it in like a kind of cartoony aspect, but that definitely feels like the intention. That feels like it's supposed to be this silly kind of thing. I just thought it was just a weird flourish. I actually kind of forgot about it.
Yeah, they don't do it a ton, but it's there. And anyway, it's a minor gripe for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Anything else that we can talk about in non-spoilers, or do you want to go into spoilers? Anything else on the performances, or anything else on anything?
I guess I would just say one other thing that I think is interesting in terms, since this is Ethan Coen's first like kind of fictional foray. Like, I think it's interesting the sort of paths, if you will, like with like Joel and then his wife Frances McDormand. Like, she played Lady Macbeth in his Macbeth, very much like, again, Shakespearean, very like serious. All I think Ethan wrote this with Trisha Cook, who is his wife, who also does identify as lesbian. They're like still married. They're still like husband and wife. I think they have like an open marriage. I don't really need to know anything more than that. That's their business. But my understanding is this is something that they had been writing for a while, and this is sort of something that had just been kind of gestating for a certain time, with the original title that you had mentioned, which again, I think is that sort of reference to, sort of more like Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, or, that, I mean, there you go. That's the Dolls is kind of right there.
Yep.
But it kind of, they would have more kind of crass language sort of in the titles there. So I think that's maybe what they were going with there. They probably thought they would be able to market it better with the word dolls.
Sure.
Regardless, this is something that I think they've been working on for a while. So I think it's kind of cool to not just think of like, not just the Coen brothers sort of splitting into different projects, but kind of like those two couples going and doing really different projects that presumably they both had on their minds for a long time, because of course Macbeth has been around for quite a while.
For a while, yeah.
A good bit, yeah.
I actually don't know. I think I forgot that Frances McDormand was married to him, to Joel Coen. That's interesting. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, and like you said, we don't need to go into it or anything, but like, Trisha Cook identifying as lesbian, that's a really interesting angle, because like that's, I mean, the movie, like that's the voice of the movie is really,
absolutely.
That's interesting. I like that. Yes. And then anything else on non-spoilers, or should we spoil this movie?
We could spoil it. There's definitely some fun things.
Oh, yes. All right. So we're going to go into spoilers for Drive Away Dolls. Once again, it is currently in theaters. I ended up rating it 3.5 stars out of 5. I enjoyed it overall. It was a fun, brisk caper road movie with some good performances from especially the two leads. What did you end up rating it, Brent?
I give it 3.5 as well.
Nice.
It doesn't reach, it's not up to that level. I mean, the Coens are just at such a high watermark. And I realize this is, Ethan's, like a solo thing. But it reminds me of these other movies. So it's not quite as good as those, but we're talking about some real bangers. So, it is still, definitely a fun watch, brisk watch.
Nice. Yeah. All right. We're going to go into spoilers for Drive Away Dolls. Here's a clip from the trailer. When we come back, we're going to be spoiling Drive Away Dolls. If you want to skip to the secondary review, check the show notes for timestamps and also at obsessiveviewer.com/OV417. Here we go. Spoilers for Drive Away Dolls.
Curly's Drive Away, Pennsylvania's most trusted name in car delivery.
Curly here.
Don't call me Curly.
And your name, Curly?
My name is Curly. We just met. It's too familiar. We're here for the car. Wait a minute. You call with a drop-off in Tallahassee, and then these broads come in and say they're ready to go to Tallahassee. They drive the car instead of you. Is that bad?
Bad if they find the goods.
What?
We should see what's in here.
I bet it's locked.
All right, so spoilers on for Drive Away Dolls. Brent, let's start with the criminal element. Well, really, let's start with the beginning with Pedro Pascal's cameo, basically.
Yeah.
I was not expecting that to go the way that it did, and I was kind of expecting from the beginning, with it being that violent and weird, like for a moment I thought, like, is this like a movie within the movie, or is this something, because it kind of seemed like a very different kind of like pulpy noir thing, and then the movie itself is kind of different from that. But how did you feel about Pedro Pascal's role in the movie, basically as limited as it was?
Yeah, I thought it was fun. I knew from the trailer that he was going to be in it, but I kind of just didn't know exactly how long. And then, once he goes down the alley, I'm like, it's probably not going to end up super great for him. I thought it was fun. He's kind of everywhere these days, and I thought it was a fun sort of callback. You talked like how violent it is. The guy who kills him goes after his eyeballs, and he like yells out, and I'm like, oh man. He got cleganed again. I thought that was kind of a neat.
Yes.
I thought that was a neat, like, sir, what is it? Viper in the Mountain callback, whatever. From Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Viper in the Mountain.
So that was fun, and that they cut him yelling in agony from his eyes getting gouged out to Beanie Feldstein having a really loud orgasm. That was like that's a fun cut too. So yeah, it's a brief thing, but always good to see him. And when he doesn't have the Mandalorian hat on, that's when your eyes can get gouged out.
Oh, so absolutely.
Just a tip for the future.
Yeah, he better watch out when he's in Fantastic Four.
That's right.
But yeah, I didn't make that connection either. I didn't pay attention to this movie. But no, I like that. It's funny because like his severed head is like part one of the MacGuffin. Like there's that, and then there's the phallic side of things, which we can get to and everything. But we're in spoilers. Like let's talk openly about this movie. What else?
So the briefcase contains five dildos that we learn were crafted or are basically molds of 5 very famous and powerful men from Matt Damon's character. Matt Damon's in this. I think you already said that part.
Yeah.
But he plays a senator somewhere in the South. And the idea was that he was trying to like retrieve these so they're not like, whatever out in the open. Because his member is one of the ones that was molded by
Miley Cyrus.
By Miley Cyrus. Yeah, he has to do the whole thing, so the whole connection. So these psychedelic flashbacks are of Tiffany Plastercaster is her name, which is based on a real woman who was a groupie in the late 60s who did make these plaster molds. The most famous one was of Jimi Hendrix before he passed. And I think like the lead singer from like MC5, I think were a few, but Jimi Hendrix was like the crown jewel, if you will, of the ones that this woman had that this real life person had molded. But that's kind of who they're riffing on in this movie with Miley Cyrus. So she makes this mold of Matt Damon's senators, characters, junk in these flashbacks, and then that all, of course, it all sort of ties together.
Yeah, which I thought was that was a lot of fun. That was one thing that I kind of didn't have a problem with it, but I feel like one of the things that I mean, this late in the movie, I don't think that it's necessarily something that'll detract from the audience, but I was surprised when like the henchmen and Coleman Domingo just got killed. They were gone. Like that whole, like that sequence was a lot of fun. And again, the banter, the bickering between Joey Slotnick and CJ Wilson was a lot of fun. And like the way that it just dives into that, I guess, homoerotic energy, or like that like casual reference to like them experimenting on each other a little bit, and then he kills them, and then they both die, or then he kills Coleman Domingo, and then I think he eventually dies from something, I don't know, but anyway, I just thought that was interesting. And also I don't know how I'm sure that there's more to mine from that in terms of like the overall movie being set in 1999, having the just like super conservative Christian senator wanting his like the proof of his impropriety or things that aren't very conservative Christian, like aren't very family values, and then I don't know, and centering it around lesbian characters while also having these henchmen characters kind of being like a I don't know, in that one moment, like kind of masculine insecurity and killing each other. And I don't know, it's I feel like there is something to all of that in terms of how it is dealing with gender dynamics and I don't know, like the culture of the time.
I think there's definitely something there. I think this is kind of one of those classic things of like most of the male characters in this movie are kind of idiots, and like most of the female characters are generally, smart, know what's going on, forward the plot, those sort of things. The sort of shootout that you mentioned that happens very quickly, and while the two young women are tied up, like that reminded me a little bit of the classic like Coen's like sort of not perfunctory violence, but just sort of like out of nowhere violence from like late aughts Coen. So like No Country, A Serious Man, and Burn After Reading, which actually Burn After Reading there's a little bit of that sort of DNA in this film as well, where characters will kind of just die like on a dime for not reasons that really would make any sense, but it's just like, it's very Greek mythology where it's a very Greek it was like out of nowhere just lightning bolts are getting thrown at your ass, so it's just like that sort of energy that I sort of liked in that scene. But and it's you're definitely right about like Coleman Domingo. I would say that's maybe he generally, like, that's what's funny about it, is like he does pretty much like he kind of figures out what's going on, but then he still ends up getting shot for really no good reason or anything like that. But yeah, so it is just funny. I did think it was funny too how the having like the dildos in the briefcase and everything, and that the dildos kind of like come into play, like in terms of the relationship between the two characters too. But there is kind of a Chekhov's dildo in the wall dildo that Beanie Feldstein is unscrewing from the wall. And I know this is like a lesbian film, so dildos aren't. It's not. Sometimes a dildo is just a dildo. But like, I was thinking, I was like, that's so funny that's like that sort of foreshadows, sort of dildos come. So, Yeah, and Beanie Feldstein's character, of course, I mean, she ends up, shooting Matt Damon, sort of, saving the day and all that. So that was all good fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do feel like Beanie Feldstein was a little bit, I don't know, maybe not underused, but underutilized.
Yeah, she's not in it.
She's not in it a lot. And like when she is kind of that persona that is in opposition to Margaret Qualley and Geraldine Viswanathan's characters, which you need that, and the context is there. But it kind of just felt like if there's one part of the movie that didn't really gel with me all that well, it was probably her. With nothing against her or the character really, it's just one slight blemish that's one thing that detracted from a less than 90-minute movie that's overall is very brisk and very well paced. It kind of slows down a little bit when she gets more incorporated into the plot, and that feels like it's a little bit of a reach when like she pops up here and there, and I don't know that's
she even pops up at Curly's driveway thing, and then doesn't bother to go in. And of course, Bill Camp is like, it's a great small role for him. And, I mean, he's awesome, but it's like, won't somebody save Curly?
Yes. But don't call him Curly. It's too familiar.
We just met. Yeah. Oh my God, that's great. But
so good.
That's great too. After when Matt Damon gets shot and kind of the movie's winding down, there is this ridiculous newspaper headline that is so specific. It's like, Matt Damon, like, senator shot outside lesbian bar, is spotted with like a briefcase of dildos and a severed head. And then below it just has a pull quote from it. I can explain, says this. It's like, you sure that can be explained away?
It's so great.
So it's just like funny stuff like that, where it's just like, it's just so goofy. But so that's what I feel like with this movie, for like a short movie for like, 80 minutes, less credits. It's like, it definitely packs quite a bit in terms of, again, like comedy and just like all of the classic like caper stuff. And then what I thought was a perfectly nice sort of romance between these two young women too, which
it was sweet.
It's not, there's not a ton of gravitas with it, but I thought it was nice. And like you said, I mean, they both have a lot of, they just have good chemistry with one another. So
I think it really played to both their strengths as performers and the strength of the writing, in terms of it being like Margaret Qualley being this like free-spirited, freewheeling kind of person. So like when they're in a position where like the basement party or whatever, the makeout party, where they like are like changing partners and like, oh, they need to make out now. It's like Margaret Qualley's character. I don't have the character names. That's why I keep just saying the actors. But
Jamie, I think Jamie.
Oh Jamie and Marion. Yeah, they're literally right there in front of me on the premise. Jesus. Anyway, Jamie is like, yeah, let's go ahead and do it. It's fine. Whatever. You need this, so let's do this. And it's very just casual, but you can sense like the feelings that are emerging between them, and it's just like opening a door to them that I think is really well drawn and really well done. So
you get some nice Linda Ronstadt there for a long time, and then Blue Bayou I think plays a couple times. They pan over, they do this nice sort of, not necessarily, I don't know if it's a 360, but when they're in this makeout party and everything, and they're showing, I think it's this like soccer players house, I think they say, or something like that. And it's just, again, very much with that 70s, although the Linda Ronstadt album cover that they have is Hasten Down the Wind, which neither of those songs are on, but it doesn't matter. The point is that it's just a nice album cover, so it's okay. I'm okay with it.
Okay, well, I'm going to Letterboxd and I'm removing my 3.5 stars.
Right now, well, and
2 stars.
It's not like this movie came out in it's not like this takes place in 1973 and they got that, because it's all of these things came out. But but anyway, it's a nice moment. And then and then she has that moment where she's in jail, and she Blue Bayou plays again, and that whole trampoline thing. There's like all these scenes in this movie that are just kind of like these like little vignettes, but they do add to something. They do kind of add to the characters and sort of what they're trying to the story they're trying to go after.
Absolutely. Anything else for spoilers? I don't think I really got anything.
I think I spoiled the entire movie.
Yeah.
Because if we do this section a little longer, we're gonna be talking about the movie longer than the movie. But yeah, that's a good time. It's a bummer to me that it's not doing well. It's not totally surprising, but it's just sort of like, okay, it'll be PVOD next month, in March, and then like, who knows, maybe it'll be like a cult movie or whatever. But it does make me wonder, like, Tragedy of Macbeth came out on Apple TV Plus, so that wasn't really a box office issue. But it does make me wonder, because Ballad of Buster Scruggs is on Netflix. I'm like, when the Coen brothers do return, like, what is their box office? Like, what is that? What does that look like? It's not all about box office, but you do at a certain point with filmmakers. It's like, I want to make sure they can get what they need to make the movies they want to make.
Right. That's honestly, I kind of completely forgot about the Ballad of Buster Scruggs.
Right.
Yeah. Hopefully when they come back together, if they do, hopefully it's, something theatrical and big and successful. So, but we'll see. Time will tell. So once again, I rated it 3.5 stars. Brent, any last words on Drive Away Dolls?
I don't think so. Yeah,
nice.
No, fun little movie, fun little deal.
Nice. I totally agree. Once again, check out Brent's review on awakeinthedark.com and be on the lookout for his review of Dune Part 2 and his episode covering Dune Part 2 of Awake in the Dark, the podcast. Brent, we're going to bid you adieu here as we switch over to our secondary review, reviewing Monolith with Joe Shearer. But before we go, once again, thank you for joining me. And where can people find you online? And what do you have coming down that I haven't already talked about, like Dune Part 2, in terms of content?
The Dune stuff is probably gonna do me for most of next week. And then, probably like Imaginary or something like that. I'm not really sure. I don't know exactly for March, but there should be some good titles there.
Nice.
I ran short on time this week, but I did like Monolith quite a bit.
Nice.
I feel bad I couldn't join you and Joe in talking about it, but it is a fun one. That is one that your boy Mike Flanagan called out on Letterboxd.
Yes, I saw that.
That's what inspired me to watch it.
Oh, nice.
So he is continues to be a force for good in the cinematic and television landscapes.
Oh yeah. I look forward to people hearing the secondary review, but also, I think I will probably say I'm not gonna anyway. My thing was, Mike porn, like podcasting porn and that. So I was, excited to watch it for that reason, but I don't
know what you talk about in it, but I do love not only that they used a Rode mic, which of course is a company that you love, but this is an Australian film.
My God. I didn't even connect that.
I assume that one of the reasons they picked a Procaster, which is, I'm almost positive, the mic that she was using throughout Monolith, probably had to do with the fact that Rode's an Australian company.
And I believe she was also using the PSA-1 boom arm, I think.
That makes sense. Yeah, I couldn't tell with like the interface and some of the other stuff, but I know she was using a Rodecaster. I'm almost positive.
Yeah, it definitely was. Which, for those listening, is Rode's kind of SM7B, sort of. Like, I don't know, it's their upper kind of...
it's a step up from the pod mic.
Yeah. Wow, that just I didn't even connect the Australian aspect of it. Anyway, so
they're all about that corporate synergy down under.
Exactly. All right. Well, where can people find you online? And
awakeinthedark.com is usually the best. That has my Facebook, Twitter X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Letterboxd, pretty much everything linked. Nice. They're kind of under different names in some cases, so that's still usually the best case. But if it's an emerging social media platform, I'm probably on it.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks once again for joining me for Drive Away Dolls, and yeah, we'll have you back on the show at some point, whenever you want. And
Killer.
yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you, Brent. And we're going to go into our secondary review of the evening, with me and Joe reviewing Monolith here in just a moment.
They tell me I view obsessively.
All right, and now joining me for this week's secondary review is my friend and IFJA colleague Joe Shearer, who can be followed on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Joe R. Shearer. You can also find his writing at MidwestFilmJournal.com and hear him on frequent appearances on the Medium Cool podcast, which is has recently kind of made a resurgence. So check those out. He also has a review of The Seeding, and he contributed an essay on Jackie Brown to the Hold On to Your Butts essay series on Midwest Film Journal, all about Samuel L. Jackson. Joe, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me to talk about Monolith. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you. Also, don't forget the Die Hard with a Vengeance one. I did that too.
Yes.
Did I do that? Hold on, let's make sure.
Yeah.
I meant to do 3 for that, and I got 2. So it was
nice.
That and and the one for Jackie Brown, which I always love to tell people, like, yes, I very much said that I thought Jackie Brown was a better movie than Pulp Fiction was.
Jeez.
So, and I stand by it.
You know,
anyway,
I can respect that. I can respect that. Jackie Brown is an interesting movie. It's something that's grown on me a lot over the years. So
yeah, and I absolutely did write the one on Die Hard with a Vengeance also.
Nice.
So, talking about Samuel L. Jackson. And I honestly, I was pretty proud of that one, to tell you the truth. I did a lot about the kind of the racial overtones of that movie, which are obviously thick, but it's one of my favorite more recent things that I've written.
Nice.
Go read that one too.
Yeah, check it out. I'll put the links in the show notes, of course. And then also you've been on Medium Cool for since Austin brought it back. I wanted to mention to you, like, I'm really enjoying it. Really enjoying hearing you on the show, and I'm glad to see Austin back at it with that, because I do enjoy that show. He
had some life things that he had to deal with that took him away for quite a while, and he came to me a few months back and said he was ready to kind of start back up and wanted to know if I wanted to contribute, and I was like, absolutely, I'm back in. And
nice.
We've been doing a couple things, and we actually have some plans for other things in the coming weeks that hopefully will kind of turn into something fun. But in the meantime, here I am hanging out with you and doing stuff here on this Monolith movie.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining me on this, because and I'm sure I will have said all of this before in the intro to the episode proper, but like, I went through a few different I've been doing weekly episodes, and like, my original plan was to do Bleeding Love for the secondary review this week, and then my screener had expired, and I was like, I'm not, it's fine. So then I wanted to do Scrambled, and like, I had a very tight deadline for the screener to expire on that, and then I was like, well, what about Monolith? Because it has to do with podcasting and science fiction. That's right up my alley. And it's also, like, I have a screener for it, but it's also streaming on Hoopla. So I was like, yeah, let's just do that. So we'll see whether that was a good decision or not. But yeah, so yeah, what anything else on Medium Cool, or anything you got in the pipeline for Midwest Film Journal, or writing elsewhere, or anything?
Yeah, not that. That's kind of the plan for the next few weeks, especially. But things always kind of jump in, and there certainly will be more things coming in the near future with Midwest Film Journal. I'll settle into something to write on. I have a bunch of, as you mentioned, screeners, and it was a funny, a little funny behind the scenes thing, I guess, is that I had that same issue where we were talking, and you were like, oh yes, I'm going to do this, and you're going to do Scrambled, and I was like, oh yes, I've got a screener for Scrambled. And then I went to watch it, and it was expired also. And it's funny because sometimes you get sometimes a day to watch them, or a couple of days they'll give you, and then sometimes you have weeks. And I knew I had weeks on this, and I just wasn't sure when it would go.
Yeah.
So and then I was like, oh, Monolith. Oh, that was expired too. I actually asked for and got an extension on that. So
oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah, these are all very first world problems and everything. Like,
yeah,
it's
like,
not. Nothing ungrateful
complain.
or anything. Yeah, no, there's no complaining there. What I'm doing, like this year for 2024, like one of my goals is to provide more coverage and get more screeners, because we get inundated with a lot of like press emails saying like, oh, hey, this screener is available. And I kind of want to branch out and watch more things and kind of especially pay more attention to kind of the smaller movies that come kind of in our sphere. And so what I have been doing, to not great effect, but what I have been doing is, like, I have a private letterbox list that anytime I get a screener, I add it to that list. It's private on Letterboxd, so only I can see it. And then I put in the description, I put like the expiration date of it. And then
nice job.
Yeah. And then I just kind of have like a list that's like screeners to watch. And then I avoid it for way too long. So
that's how I am too. I just did it on Gmail right now, and I have I just star them on Gmail, and I found, and I go through this list, and then it ends up being like, we're going to give you one, and then I go back and I'm like, where is it at? And I can't find it. And it ended up, It just when, like anything, when you have organization or lack thereof, things fall through the cracks a little easier. So yeah.
And my like I don't want to get into like how frantic my inbox is and everything with everything, but like I'm one of those people that I'll get an email and then I'll just like leave it read, and then just it piles up. Like I have thousands of emails in my inbox, and I'm like, but anyway, enough of this inside baseball stuff. We are going to be doing our secondary review for the evening. We're talking about Monolith, which is a movie that is currently available to rent and buy on VOD, and it is also streaming on Hoopla, which if you don't have Hoopla, you can get it through your library and just connect your library card. You get 10 rentals a month. And there's a pretty decent stuff a pretty decent amount of stuff on there. Like, I don't know if it's specific to different libraries, but like my Hoopla account, like I have a ton of A24 movies on there. There's like Four Weddings and a Funeral was one. Mystic Pizza was another one that was also on there. And then a bunch of A24 movies and everything. But anyway, I
used to get a lot of music off of there back in the day,
nice.
but I haven't used it. My library card expires like annually.
Oh, interesting.
So I have not been back for a couple of years to even renew it. So I'm, I think you just go in and do it, but it's, it's like, I used to go pretty frequently with my kids when my kids are younger, but nowadays it's like, I actually go to the Brownsburg Library more with my girlfriend and her kids than I do with my own kids.
Nice.
So,
nice. So Monolith, we are going to be doing a non-spoiler and spoiler review on this because there's some spoilery things that we can kind of discuss, but what I'll do is I'll put timestamps and everything. You guys know the drill. But the plot summary, courtesy of IMDb, is this is a weird plot summary too because it feels like an incomplete sentence. But the premise is a headstrong journalist whose investigative podcast uncovers a strange artifact, an alien conspiracy, and the lies at the heart of her own story. Okay. Director was Matt Vesley, and writer was Lucy Campbell, and the cast includes Lily Sullivan as the only person on screen, and a bunch of people, a bunch of supporting voice performances as well. So, Joe, we are going to do a non-spoiler review of Monolith. I was going to ask, like, so you already had a screener. So was there anything about this movie that particularly piqued your interest that made you want to seek it out?
Well, I do. I mean, honestly, not in particular at the outset. After I watched the trailer, I thought it was kind of an enticing kind of movie. It's got a bit of a sci-fi premise, or at least one that's, it seems like it could be sci-fi, but it's set in, it's kind of a real world thing. You know, a thriller. I'd hesitate to call it a horror movie, but it almost seems like it wants to be a horror movie, but it's not really. But you know, I like that whole premise that, you know, we talked about before we started recording. That I don't know what you want to call it, but I would call it more recently like a Locke sort of thing. There was a movie Locke several years ago with Tom Hardy where it's essentially a one-person show. The only person you really see is the main character. In that case, it was Tom Hardy, and in this case, it was what is her name?
Lily Sullivan.
Yeah, Lily
Very
Sullivan.
contained.
I realized too as I was looking at IMDb that she's credited as the interviewer, and that made me think: did we ever hear an actual name for her character?
Nope. No, we never did.
She was in Evil Dead Rise also last year too.
Yeah, I hear she was fantastic in that. I didn't see it, but yeah.
That was I've enjoyed Evil Dead Rise quite a bit. So
nice.
There she is. As I have pulled up, she was. I think she was the mom. Yeah, that movie's very intense, and
nice.
As the first one was, but it's she was very good, and it's an interest. It certainly is an interesting premise to go in a low budget sort of way, to have what I guess the tease anyway, as you said. Is like a sort of a sci-fi kind of thing. What does it say? That an alien conspiracy. But to be quite honest, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, but you know exactly what that conspiracy is, I'm still not entirely sure about.
Yeah, that's kind of the whole reason why I want to do a separate spoiler section, because I kind of want to I want to work through some thoughts on that. But but for me, this will not come as any surprise to anyone. But the thing that kind of made me interested in it was just like, I mean, the promotional materials, the poster, the trailer, everything, very prominent podcast setup. Like there's a microphone, there's a woman with headphones on, she's recording a podcast, and I'm like, oh, that's something I do. I want to go to there. But also just the whole sci-fi aspect of it, because I'm a huge fan of science fiction. One of my favorite movies 6 or 7 years ago was The Vast of Night. Was it 6 years? I don't know. The Vast of Night, which is kind of a similar movie, to be honest, better movie in my opinion, but it was a fantastic movie. And this kind of evoked those thoughts a little bit when I kind of sought it out. But going into it, I had no idea that it was this self-contained isolation movie with this one character and one location. And I think that the Locke comparison is pretty apt. But this movie also has a benefit of having like what looks like a gorgeous location, like a completely gorgeous house. Like like it's set up that she's there kind of convalescing after, you know, her image was a little bit tarnished from something that I think is intentionally left open-ended and vague. But basically it was implied that she was canceled, and now she's doing podcasts to eke out a living while staying in her parents' house while they're away. And so that's what kind of piqued my interest into Monolith, because I'm always kind of seeking out these kinds of smaller sci-fi things that could surprise me. So overall, in like non-spoilers, how did you feel about the movie overall?
Yeah, I think that I enjoyed what this movie wanted to be a little more than what it actually was. You mentioned the lead character. She was a disgraced journalist. She made some sort of error, or had some unsubstantiated bit of something that ended up being sort of an accusation kind of thing, that was, you know, she very publicly did something bad and got caught and called out, and as you said, kind of canceled, or she lost her job at the very least. And so she's doing this podcast, and and it just kind of goes weird from there. It's like I said, this premise is pretty strong. You know, it's if you do it right, if you have the right actor and the right story, you can really do something very cool and kind of, I don't know, earth shattering, if you want to say that. To, if this was like a large scale alien invasion kind of movie, and it could have sort of an Invasion of the Body Snatchers kind of vibe, where
totally,
it builds this, the paranoia. But this kind of I feel like it kind of gets bogged down in telling its backstory.
Yes.
And that's also not to say like we have said this alien conspiracy or alien invasion. I don't even, but again, like, I don't even know that that's what this really is. It's not real. Again, don't want to spoil, but it's not super clear what actually happens as the film goes along. But that's why, that's what my big criticism is, that I just feel like it gets bogged down in all of these details where, she starts her podcast, and you hear her like narrating a little bit. She's interviewing people for the podcast, and they tell their story, and then she gets something else from a different story, and then she gets something else from a different story. And then some of the things kind of start lining up for her, and then they kind of start leaning in her direction a little bit. And you start then you have to learn a whole new set of things that happened in her past.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of, after a while, you're sort of trying to connect all the dots, as she is. This is one of those movies where she's investigating, and she has the in this case, it's like her sliding glass doors, this giant like fancy sliding glass door that she's like dropping Post-it notes on, and like she's got like the twine that she's connecting things basically, and but it's like the whole way you're going, it's kind of like, right, but for what? Like, what is the thing? There's a thing about these bricks, so these bricks that are something, you have hallucinations, and that's just the whole thing. It's like, it's not scary enough to really hit that horror note.
Absolutely. And
it's also not clear enough, I guess, to kind of support what they're trying to do, this larger story.
Absolutely. The way that the movie kind of introduces this whole, like, the mystery of the bricks, like, it feels like up until a certain point, the entire time I kept thinking, like, man, I wish that this was more interesting. I wish that they were doing something a little bit more interesting with this backstory, or with the escalation of like her learning more about these mysterious bricks. Like, there's some kind of disconnect with me where they introduce this concept of these like talismanic bricks that give people visions, and there's other properties to them. But it's such a slog from the introduction to that as a concept to like where the movie eventually ends up. But even before then, it's not until something that we'll talk about in the spoilers that it kind of takes a turn. And like, that's like an hour into the movie, and it's just like,
yes,
it's so weird. And it's not like an issue of it being an isolated single person movie, because I think she does a phenomenal job carrying this movie. She does a really good job. But the issue is that a lot of the stuff that is going on is like built as a slow burn toward the ending. But when you just have one character interacting with voices, it just doesn't really sustain, or it doesn't really keep up any momentum until the end. So
there are times, there's a couple of times in this movie where she, basically, so her paranoia is sort of ramping up as things keep happening. So things start to, like we said, these people are describing these things that are happening to them. They describe this brick, and then some of these things kind of start happening to her, and she starts freaking out a little bit. But then there are just these scenes where she calls these people who she had just previously talked to and had a good working relationship with them, and she starts lobbing insults at them, and it doesn't really feel earned. It's like you are staking an awful lot on what ends up being some assumptions, and going in real hot with it too. It's not like it's not like you're even talking to these people and like, oh, well, it's weird because this thing happened to me, just like it happened to you. Like, what's going on? And it's not like she arrives at it. She like is on the phone and she's like, listen, I know some people and they're gonna just like come at you with a club, you know, like not exactly. I mean, she does threaten them, but not with physical violence. But you know, it's just like 0 to 60 like right away.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, wait a minute, like this is pretty problematic. I've been a freelance journalist doing interviews with people before, and it's enough for me to just want to get most people on the phone, much less have these you know, in-depth conversations like they are having. And I wouldn't be like jumping on their case right away without some real hard proof. It's like, well, she just goes right at it, so it must be a little different for her. But
and like there's an argument that can be made that like maybe it's due to her being just very on edge because of what happened in her past, or because of what led her to have to do podcasts and everything. But it's also like there's intentionally not enough backstory given to that. It's very vague, that it doesn't really connect that well. And then also there's something that the movie does that in the moment, I kind of enjoyed, but the more I think about it, the more I think it was a missed opportunity. And that's where basically when she's conducting an interview or she's talking to someone and they're giving their story, the movie cuts to like a POV of like their perspective going through like an empty space, and it has like some certain set decoration that's really interesting. Like that's a really interesting thing. But on one hand, the sound design, weirdly enough, was like those, like I had to turn down the volume because it was like booming voices.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why is this movie about podcasting not mastered correctly? And then the second thing was, I just feel like those are like vignettes from other people's perspectives that she is apparently imagining. But like, why not just make, like, it just seemed like a weird thing to do rather than have her have like escalating visions or use the space that she's in to create a more atmospheric kind of presence. But and
that's the whole thing, is that I mean, and I agree with you though. Yeah, those are sort of wasted moments because they're sort of creepy things that they're describing. But the visuals are not, and there's even like horror film kind of music there, right? Like like foreboding and like building, you know, creepy music, and it just never pays off. There's not a scare in the movie. It's not even a horror movie, but from the trailer, I was certainly led to believe it was at least had some aspects of that. It's supposed to be at least a mind bender thriller sort of deal.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that really, I mean, until like toward the end, there's finally a thing at the end where it finally feels like something weird, but until then, there's nothing really. It's just like, isn't this creepy? Isn't this creepy? Yeah, cool. We're going to the next thing.
Exactly.
And there's never a payoff. There's never a scare. And I kind of feel like if this movie had been gotten a hold of by a studio, they probably would have seen that and been like, you need to throw a couple in. No, I'm not the hugest proponent of, you know, studio movies versus independent.
Sure.
But I think a movie like this could have used a little more, had some producers that were maybe seasoned. I don't know who the producers are. I haven't even looked, but of this movie, but between the director, the writer, and the people producing it, it just feels awfully tame and slow and unexciting for a lot of it. And like I said, that once it does, instead of ramping up, it kind of like ramps and then drops back down toward the beginning. I wish that we had seen some of those, especially like the background, like, or there are some like at one point the lead character, she's watching home videos of herself as a child, and I wish that had been introduced earlier.
Yes.
As it is, it comes in about, I don't know, past the halfway point. And it's, as I said, kind of a new set of things you have to kind of pay attention to. If they had interspersed that earlier, it would have at least felt like it fit a little better.
Like,
and even kind of meshed with because as it turns out, it sort of does mesh with that, with the things that are happening in real time, but it's just sort of oddly off as it is.
Yes.
It just doesn't quite land.
It comes in way too late, and because of that, like, it's after the movie, for me at least, after the movie's tension kind of plateaued. And so, like, when you mention, like, it's that downward embarkment of that, or what embarkment, but that downward slide of that, it's like, yeah, this is introducing brand new information, but we're already disengaged with the tension that had been built up relatively well up until it just kind of got a little bit boring. Yeah. And it's funny because, like, those vignettes, or those, like, perspectives that feel like very ominous and blowing out the speakers, but like, when those were first introduced, like, there's a few, maybe 2 or 3 of them in the movie, and, like, when they were first introduced, I, like, while I was watching, I was like, oh, maybe this will be a movie that I recommend to Mike, my friend Mike, he's like far and away the biggest horror fan I know, and I was like, oh, this will be fun. I can text Mike and say, hey, you know, if you have Hoopla, check this out and everything. And then as the movie went on, I was just like, yeah, it's not really a horror thing. Like, it's not really that. So, unfortunately, I'm not recommending it to Mike, but
yeah. well, and then, you know, so I guess if we were like, it's not a horror movie, well, it's a sci-fi movie, but we also, through the movie, don't have anything that really strings us along. We get kind of this promise of, because someone actually says, it's like, I think she maybe says, it's alien in origin, and you're like, oh, well, okay, well, that's interesting. But then again, there's never a real payoff to that, and it's just sort of something they're talking about, and then like I said, the end happens, and you know, we'll get to the spoiler part of it, but I am still not even sure exactly what that was, what we see.
Yeah,
it certainly is different, and I had a certain interpretation of it.
Same.
But then I was also like, maybe that's not what it is. So.
Yeah, we'll have to talk that out in spoilers, but the one thing I want to mention, and this is going to be annoying, I promise, but, like, something that I did appreciate, and, like, I'm saying this sincerely, not as a bit or anything, but, like, I actually was genuinely pleased with the way that the movie showcased podcast production. Like, honestly, like I have vivid nightmares of Halloween Ends where they have the RE20 mic as a side address mic, which it's not, and, like, that is, like, that's a childish, stupid joke and everything, but it's like a dumb, like, it's a dumb, like, nitpick of mine. But, like, here they have the Rode Procaster on a PSA1 boom arm, and, like, she's speaking at it off axis. She's using, like, Logic, I think, to edit it, and it shows her editing and splicing the stuff, and I'm like, yes, finally, I'm represented. But
which is also misusing it, as we find out in that one segment.
Yes, yeah,
but it, you know, which is again the reason why she's in the bad predicament she's in, is that she has done something sort of unethical, and then she does something else unethical that leads to more problems later on. But but also doesn't really directly lead to problem. It just kind of makes somebody mad.
Yeah, and that's.
Like,
like,
go ahead.
Like, the whole concept of the movie, her being isolated, her being alone, it being solely on her, and her having this backstory of being, you know, being canceled, doing something unethical to get canceled and everything. I feel like the ways that informs her current situation are kind of few and far between. It doesn't really seem like it connects all that well. Whereas, like, when you have a movie like The Vast of Night, which that movie also kind of ends on a ambiguous, weird, like, unexplainable note, but the ride to that was filled with these two characters having, like, amazing chemistry and having just, like, this snappy dialogue, all of this, like, energetic stuff. This filmmaking was incredible. Like, you can get away with that kind of ambiguous ending, but here it's like, when we have an absence of that, where there isn't a lot of character stuff, there isn't a lot of build up emotionally for the character. When we reach like an ending where it's like, okay, what was that about? It's more like what was that about rather than, oh, was it about?
Yeah.
Which was my professional analysis of the ending of the movie.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna just go ahead and give full credit to my girlfriend because she watched it with me, and we had a little bit of a discussion about it, and it seems very obvious that like after we started talking about it, that the larger, and again we'll get into this more in terms of the spoilers, but it ends up sort of being kind of that guilt that is kind of that unifying theme is the things that you do, the bad things that you do at different times kind of coming back to haunt you. And that's, and I was like, I was like, oh, she said that. I was like, yes, this, okay, I'm with you on this. But then she was like, but it still just didn't go anywhere. And that's just the whole problem with this movie is that it has these couple of different themes of what it could be. And then what it ends up being is admirable in some ways, but also doesn't feel fully explored. Right. And it's, and I don't know how to, I couldn't, it'd be easy for me to say, oh yes, change this scene and this scene to this. Right. But it's a little bit harder because it's such a deep theme. And I think that's kind of some of the issue is that they're really trying to tackle a large, a really large idea, and they weren't really sure how to. Yeah. Because you could certainly make a movie about guilt involving, set during like an alien invasion. I mean, that's happened before. Yeah. I mean, Signs is kind of one that kind of comes to mind, which I kind of had a little bit of, I mean, in just a skeletal kind of way. Yeah. But there are some things that sort of call back to something like Signs too. But again, and that movie's very flawed on its own, but nothing that Monolith does is anywhere as remotely as interesting as what Signs does. I agree. Again, not as a movie that I could love a whole lot more than I actually do, but it goes off in weird directions also, but in the Shyamalan kind of way, that's something different. But anyway, this is like that. This is almost like an anti-Shyamalan movie because it's just sort of like nothing ever really happens. Right. It's just kind of like we're just kind of ambling along, and it's not a series of like crazy events meant to scare you and frighten you. It's just kind of like we're gonna amp up the dread in the most minuscule possible way that we can, and then leading up to something sort of confusing at the end. Yeah, while being meditative, but not really seeming like it's really meditating on too deep of anything. So meditative without a real mantra. Exactly. Yes. Like yeah. Do you want to go into spoilers for Monolith? Yeah, I think I'm ready to. All right. Well, we're going to go into spoilers for Monolith. Before we do that, Joe, what did you rate this out of 5 stars? I gave it 2.5. 2.5. Nice. Yeah, and again, it's a premise that could be. This movie could have easily been a 4-star, 4.5 star movie. But it just kind of lacks a lot. It feels like it could use it. I think it needs somebody else to come in and to give a pass at the script before it got to be made. Yeah. Someone who is seasoned at making films of this type, because the pieces are kind of there. It's just I think the script just needed a little bit more work to take out a few things here, add a few other things there, and before it was really ready to be released to us. Again, and I guess before I go, I do want to mention briefly that I don't really know the backstory to this movie, but on IMDb it's listed as a 2022 release. Yes, I was going to bring that up. Like, I guess it was in like on the festival circuit in 2022. So my kind of guess is that it was maybe
a pandemic movie, and maybe that's why it's that self-contained thing, which I mean, if that's the case, like, I mean, they did a really good job with all of that, but yeah, maybe that's why there was a little bit of not quite like left hand talking to the right hand kind of thing. But let's
this does feel like a movie that could be like in the middle of a cut, like between two cuts of a film, that's kind of what it feels like. So I'm not saying I'm not going to give it a pass, but I'm keeping that in mind. Like it's not a totally unenjoyable film, just as kind of a closer. But it needs more.
Absolutely. But let's go ahead and go into spoilers for Monolith. Once again, it is available on VOD and streaming on Hoopla. I ended up rating it 3 stars, by the way. We'll talk about that in spoilers. But here we go. Spoilers. I'm going to play a clip from the trailer, and when we come back, we're going to be spoiling Monolith.
When I listened to your podcast, I thought, that's that damn rock. It's the visions that really get me. It feels violent.
My grandfather has changed, replaced with something else. Stop.
Hello?
Before I received my break, I had a very strange vision.
How do you know if you're having these visions?
All right, so spoilers on for Monolith. Oh boy. Okay, so I kind of want to start by just talking about the video. When she receives the package and it's that flash drive, and like I did get vibes of Signs from that because it reminded me exactly of the birthday party scene in Signs. Yeah. But it wasn't until like midway through that whole clip where I was like, oh, it's her. It's her childhood. And then like when that clicked together, I was just like, I wish this happened 20 minutes earlier because this is such an interesting reveal. Yeah. And then it goes into the whole thing with like the housekeeper was jealous or they stole it for, I don't even remember. It's kind of convoluted and it comes a little bit too late, but what did you make of that whole twist? And
it was just, it just felt so tacked on. So again, I think we haven't done a great job of discussing these bricks. Like this, this black brick is the sort of talisman that people end up getting, and even as the movie goes along, they're just saying, she asks us like, well, where did it come from? She's like, I'm not really going to talk to you about it. It just seems like it was there. And the implication is that there was some sort of event where it arrives, but the first girl who talks about it doesn't want to discuss that for whatever reason. And we assume the trauma of it, right? With this character, with the interviewer or whatever her name happens to be, she literally like vomits it out of her body, which again, like it being inside of her body metaphorically, going back to the guilt metaphor, like it fits in that case, but also why, where did was this inside of her? and there's no logical reason for it to be there.
Is it supposed to be her visions of it? Like, is that what's...
because they talk about how there are... I don't know. They talk about how you have these visions and they're not real and it's, they're frightening and all these things. But then also it's like, why? And what? And this was the first thing I thought was, okay, that idea of this brick showing up, and also the way they say brick, like they're like, that's that brick, and it's like it feels like something that is going to be foreboding. It's like the ring. Like the ring is another thing it sort of evokes in some ways, and it's like that videotape, and it's like when you're watching it, it's like that videotape becomes foreboding and scary in some way, or the phone ringing, like in Scream, like the phone ringing became scary. But in this, it's like it's a brick, it's a inanimate object that doesn't, and there is never really anything really frightening about it, other than it just kind of like comes up through her, esophagus, and she kind of vomits it out in this awkward way. And then it's just kind of like, okay, well, there's that. Now what? And we just don't really get anything until the end.
Yeah. And like I kind of, I don't know. I kind of like the way that it tries to dive into some of the stuff with it, like the whole like scanning it and seeing like these like letters or these figures that are like an alien language. Like that's really interesting stuff, but it also just kind of evokes other movies like Arrival, and then at the end it reminds me of Annihilation, and it's just like I don't know what the sum of everything is saying.
Right.
Aside from guilt, which does open it up pretty well to being about guilt, but it also seems a little bit forced with her childhood and it being a whole thing where it was traded or whatever the deal was with that.
Yeah. So there was something where the first woman that she interviews had been, I don't know, she was a housekeeper. She was the housekeeper.
I think like her mom, or she was the housekeeper, I think.
For the main character's family. And they later on have this conversation. She's like, "Oh my God, like you're their daughter?" And she was like, "Yes." And they apparently like stole the brick from her. And I like that was never real clear to me. Like they apparently stole the brick.
Yeah.
So because the interviewer then thought that she was doing this as some like weird long-term revenge plot. It's like, you took my brick and now I'm going to torment you years later when you're an adult. Like as I was sitting there, I was like, what sort of thing do I have where I would spend 10 years trying to exact revenge on someone for stealing it?
Yeah.
Like it is like a giant diamond. Like, would I spend 10 years for something like that? Like, I mean, I could see an ongoing vendetta, but I can't imagine something that would spark me to do something like that. So, but anyway, it's not that anyway. But I was still just like, at least I don't think it was that. Maybe it was that.
I don't think so, because I think, well, if it was, I think it's more about the talismanic principles of the brick and how it's like, whatever. But I don't know. And then by the end of the, not to jump around or anything, but by the end of the movie, when it's like it ends with this ambiguous ending where she's like, I'm going to tell a story. And like my read of that is that the alien version of her got the upper hand, killed her, and now is going to spread the invasion through podcasting, which I'm all for. I think that that's a pretty cool ending because I like that idea of it reaching out to so like millions of people across the world. Like that's a really intriguing ending. But just the way that it gets there just feels not that well drawn or well thought out.
Yeah. So, I mean, so we mentioned it, so we might as well go through all of that. So so she vomits up the brick, and then a few minutes later, a duplicate of herself walks up to her in her house, and there's just this weird scene for a couple of seconds where they are just staring at each other, and it's just like, oh, like what? Okay, well, this is certainly weird, and it turns into a chase where the prime version of this woman takes off running, and the duplicate chases her, and that's what my first thought there was. Yes, that was an alien version of her, like an invasion of the body snatchers type thing, where it's replacing people. These aliens are replacing people. But again, we never really get any sort of confirmation of that, like not verbally, not, and there's no like newspaper headline or, TV broadcast where they discuss it. It's just sort of like, it sort of ends and it ends in a struggle on the shore. One of them strangles the other and throws the body into the lake that they're by. And then she ambles back and starts this podcast again, which I didn't even necessarily take it as alien one. I mean, that was my assumption because she like crushes this device with her bare hand.
Yeah.
The recording device she sits out, and that's kind of the thing that sparks it. She like turns on the recording device and slides it in between the two of them, and it's just like, what are you? And she picks it up and crushes it with her. It's like, like a recorder, like a phone. It was like the size of a cell phone. Like imagine her crushing an iPhone in her hands, like with one hand. Like, so you're like, oh, okay. So she has like superhuman strength also. But then later as they're struggling, she doesn't really seem to have superhuman strength.
Yeah. That's kind of tricky. And, I don't think it was this, but I think it was a Tascam DRM1. I think that's what it's called, a handy recorder. But I don't know if that's what it is, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So, but yeah, in the kind of jokey reaction I had to that was like when she slides the recorder there and hits record and starts talking. I was like, this is the ultimate fantasy, interviewing yourself on a podcast. Yes. This is what I need out of my entire life. But yeah, it just seems a little bit flimsy. I think that there is a line of dialogue that is in the trailer where one of the callers says that his grandfather has changed into someone else.
Yes.
And I think that's establishing and establishing this whole body snatcher concept. But I think that the end, they try to have their cake and eat it too, that yes, we don't know who got the upper hand. We don't know who is alive. And we don't know if her doing the podcast is her spreading the signal to take over, or if that's her spreading, if that's like her prime sending messages saying like, hey, we need to, cut this out. This is bad. This is all crazy alien stuff.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish, I don't know if I necessarily needed it to come down one way or the other. I just needed that to land with a little bit more mystique and interest, because all the lead up to that just felt a little bit not properly built toward.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. So it's so the end result of it all is just sort of a kind of generally unsatisfying plot, I guess.
Yeah.
There were, again, we touched on some of the positive things. I thought that Lily Sullivan was pretty fantastic, and it's hard to pull off a one person show like that.
Right.
And she does a pretty good job of it. It was just what she was given to do in the midst of it was, it made it feel like more like she was holding on for dear life, trying to make things happen rather than the plot kind of carrying us. And, I wish that the material itself would have been a little stronger than what it was and give us something to really wrestle with, I guess, a little bit. Same.
Yeah. Yep. Any other thoughts on Monolith? I don't think I really have anything else to say about it.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of struggling to find things. There's a lot of little character beats, but again, I just couldn't care enough about them because the main story was lacking. Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to like it a lot more than I did.
Same here. It's admirable. Like I said, I rated it 3 stars. It's definitely not terrible. So, I mean, check it out if you have, the hour and a half to spare. Once again, it's on VOD, on Hoopla, elsewhere. That's our review of Monolith. And Joe, do you want to just do a quick potpourri section to round out the episode, or do you have time?
Sure. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I will throw it to you. Is there anything that you've watched lately, or anything that you're looking forward to, or anything that you've watched lately that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I've watched just a few things recently. I watched Ordinary Angels a couple days ago. That's the new Hilary Swank and Alan Richson.
Oh yeah,
the guy
Reacher.
From Reacher. Yeah. And it's an odd faith-based movie, which is odd to see either of them in a movie like that.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know, it was something.
Sure.
It's just, it was honestly, it was a regular weepy tearjerker kind of movie with a couple of scenes where it was just like, why don't you talk to Jesus anymore, Daddy?
Oh,
It was
geez.
just like there was a scene, like it's just like the movie goes along, and then every once in a while they're like, oh yes, let's trot out something about Jesus. And it's just like there's a scene where Nancy Travis actually plays Alan Richardson's. I don't want to keep saying his name wrong. So she plays his mom. She plays Reacher's mom. And there's this scene where it's and this is like literally what's happened. Like his wife died. His daughter has a terminal illness and is about to, like, if she doesn't get a liver transplant soon, she's gonna die. And he's like recounting all of these things, like all of the things that make his life suck right now. And she's like, and Nancy Travis is the mom, just is like, don't you lose your faith now. And I'm like, where the hell did that come from? Number one, at this point, does he have any faith left at all? Like, he's, this is pretty grim.
Yeah.
And
wow.
And it just happens. And it's just like, again, it's almost just like they're like, oh yes, let's convert this into a faith-based movie. Alan Richardson, yeah, if I got his name right. It's just like, here's this, very normal movie. Let's just drop a scene in here and there. So that is one thing. It's just sort of I would call it a kind of interesting train wreck. Also, another guy who I have in my past interviewed, Drew Powell, another guy from Indiana, has a small role in this as well. Amy Acker from I don't know, she was in Buffy. And she's in Firefly and things like that. She has a small role. So there, there's a few recognizable actors, but it's it is what it is. There's a lot of cliches about addiction and helping people, and this is another one that could have been a whole lot better than it actually was if they had focused less on the Jesus-y part and focused a little more on, like, let's make a good movie. They could have made a pretty decent weepy tearjerker kind of, my daughter is dying of an incurable illness against all hope, kind of thing. But yeah, there's also a lot of scenes here where it's like, my daughter's going to die unless this happens, like this virtually impossible thing happens right now. And it's just like, and then there's a character who's just like, are you really going to do this? Like, you can't. There's like literally is like a snow. It's like, I got to take my daughter to the hospital in the snowstorm. And the grandma character, Nancy Travis's character, is just like, you can't do that. She'll get a cold.
Oh my God.
It's like, you can't take her out in the snowstorm. Like, you're going to crash. It's like, she's going to die if she doesn't get this thing done. Like, what are we doing at this point?
That's fantastic.
This to be the person to say, you can't do this. And it's like, listen, this is going to happen. So wow. That's a movie that I saw that was, it was, again, less. That's well, I'll say it like this. I in my current, again, it's very early. I don't want to, I'm not casting aspersions, but Monolith is my second worst movie of the year so far. Up to 10. I've seen 10 movies. Okay. So like, let's not get crazy. Ordinary Angels is the worst I've seen. But again, it's just like kind of bad, at that point. So, what else have I watched recently? I watched The Greatest Night in Pop, which is the documentary on Netflix about the recording of We Are the World. That's kind of a big like milestone event in my life. And I found the documentary utterly fascinating. Nice. It's got interviews with people that are telling stories about. So it's got like Lionel Richie is sort of the main character, I guess, if you want to call him that. And so there's a lot of talking about like how he recruited Michael Jackson, and then it like led into Billy Joel and Diana Ross and Dionne Warwick, and like basically Hall & Oates, or at least I think Daryl Hall. Quincy Jones was, of course, involved, but it's basically like it's assemblage of the greatest talent that was available, musically in the world, and pretty much all of them assembled immediately after the Grammys, and pulled an all-nighter to record this song. I found it just completely fascinating. Nice. There's a great bit about Bob Dylan, about how nervous Bob Dylan was, because there's all these like magnificent singers, like people with the huge voices, and here he is with this little like nasally thing that is a little nasally bit, and he was scared to sing, and they had to like give him this pep talk and be like, no, listen, like we want you here to do what you do. You do what you do. And so if you listen to that song, like he has a little section of his own, right? And it's like that's kind of it. So that was pretty strong. I saw one called Drift, which has I feel bad. Cynthia Erivo and Aaliyah Shawkat, who I know mostly from Arrested Development.
Yeah.
And Cynthia Erivo, who's kind of up and coming herself. That was a pretty decent movie. It's another one of these movies where they're just kind of, there's a character kind of ambling about, and but this one kind of goes somewhere.
Okay.
So it's pretty solid. I won't get too far into it, but it's a woman who's a refugee from a West African country, and she's on a Greek island, and she's homeless, and she's basically trying to get by and like survive, and she is trying to also lay low for some reasons. And she ends up meeting people basically who are kind of helping her. I would call it a nice solid movie, kind of a 3.5 star movie.
Okay.
I think most people will enjoy, especially if they're a fan of like those hard scrabble drama, kind of like showy. This is a movie that if it had gotten a little more behind it, it would have been like an Oscar contender kind of thing. It would have come out in late October or early November, and we would have gotten a screener for that. But but I don't think it quite rises to that level. But I don't think it doesn't have to. It's a fine movie that is worth watching and has some really good performances. It's pretty low key, but again, there's some things happening. So yeah, that's a couple of things. I've got kind of my whole list here, but I don't want to go into everything.
Sure.
Quite frankly, it's not all really worth mentioning.
Sure. I'll kind of. Huh?
What have you watched lately?
Oh yeah, so I haven't watched that much stuff that I haven't already covered. All over the place. Like, I do want to say though that I did see Lisa Frankenstein. I'll go ahead and talk about that. Lisa Frankenstein with Catherine Newton. Directed by Zelda Williams, written by Diablo Cody. And it was reasonably enjoyable. The story is about kind of and kind of offbeat loner girl. It's in 1989, a misunderstood teenager has a high school crush who just happens to be a handsome corpse. After a set of playfully horrific circumstances brings him back to life, the two embark on a murderous journey to find love, happiness, and a few missing body parts along the way. So it's a pretty interesting kind of offbeat horror comedy where they're basically assembling this man to be a real live boy. And the areas that it goes to is pretty enjoyable. I think the biggest standout for the movie for me was Catherine Newton. I think she does a phenomenal job playing this just very kind of deranged, but charmingly so, character. And it's kind of fun, but I think the kind of the sum of all of its parts doesn't really kind of complete to a very memorable movie. But I do think that it's a pretty decent directorial debut by Zelda Williams though. So I do recommend checking it out. It's pretty fun.
It also has Cole Sprouse.
Yes, Cole Sprouse.
My daughter is a fan of. Nice. He's from. I know him first from Big Daddy. Then he's been in a bunch of, I don't know. He was in Riverdale, right? More recent. Jughead and was he Jughead? Yeah, Jughead. Yeah. And he was. What's the other? He was. I don't know. This was it like The Sweet Life. Yeah, The Sweet Life. That's him.
Was it Sweet Life with Zach and Cody?
Yeah. I'm looking. He was in Wizards of Waverly Place. Mm-hmm. So
wasn't he? He was one of the twins that was the kid in Friends. Ross's son in Friends.
Yes. Was that too? Yeah. Yep. So
Lisa Frankenstein was okay. Couple other really quick ones I'll run down and then we can kind of end the episode. I also watched SubUrbia on Criterion Channel. It's actually leaving Criterion Channel today when you guys are listening to this on the 29th. Happy Leap Day. But SubUrbia, it's 1996, Richard Linklater, kind of slacker comedy, coming of age comedy. It's kind of like basically just a meld of Slacker and Dazed and Confused, but not as good as either for me.
Okay.
Yeah, it just felt like I think that if I had seen it when I was in my early to mid 20s, I'm in my late 30s now. If I had seen it in my early to mid 20s, that brand of like Gen X kind of pseudo intellectual, listless, kind of in between phases of life, kind of motif would have spoken to me the way that like Clerks or Dazed and Confused or other movies like that did at the time. I probably would have taken to SubUrbia a little bit more, but at the end of the day, it just didn't really work all that well for me. It just, yeah, like the ensemble is solid, but there are certain things that the movie goes through, or certain areas that the movie kind of veers into that doesn't really, like there's a whole subplot with, I think it's Nicky Cat. He plays like this kind of deranged guy who's like former military, and he's a little bit off, like he's very agitated at a lot of things, and he's very aggressive. And then he and Parker Posey plays like a label executive or an assistant to a famous singer from the town who comes back to the town and pals around with the group. So they kind of hit it off. And then there's that plot line goes down a kind of dark path that lingers for a long time before Linklater just kind of pulls the rug out from under you and kind of just reverses it. And it's like, it would have made some interesting commentary and it would have went down to some interesting paths if it would have committed to that, but the movie didn't want to commit to it. And that's kind of all across the movie too. It's just a lot of setups with not a lot of very strong payoffs, because it's kind of that slacker kind of slice of life sort of thing. It's like, it's a scripted movie. It's not improv or anything, but it just didn't really work all that well for me. So that's SubUrbia. It's, if you're listening to this in the first 24 hours of release, it's got like X number of hours left on Criterion Channel right now.
Get to it.
Yeah.
There is, if you're a fan of true crime documentaries, there is one that I saw recently called Lover, Stalker, Killer. It's on Netflix. It's one of those Netflix ones.
Nice.
That at the very least, it has an interesting twist to it.
Okay.
It does, it's true crime, so it is what it is. But it was pretty engaging from that standpoint of having this sort of like major twist in it that was kind of interesting. So that's worth seeing if you haven't caught that.
Sweet.
You can see that on Netflix now. It was, when I watched it was like one of the top 10 things. So
yeah. Is it a documentary feature or docuseries?
It's a feature.
Okay.
So
nice.
So it's essentially about a man, and it kind of touched base for me as someone who in the last several years has used dating services. I'm not. Years. But like dating apps and things. So it's basically about a man who gets divorced. He has a couple of kids, and he has to move to Omaha, Nebraska to be near his children because his ex-wife moves there. So he starts dating, and he meets this woman who he goes on a date with, and then he goes on a date with another woman, has an uncomfortable exchange with the first woman he dated, and then suddenly this woman is texting him threats. And
oh, no.
like I'm going to devote my life to ruining yours
Jesus.
Because of the single date that we had. And it's bizarre and mystifying in some ways, but and then again, there's a pretty major twist that comes about that kind of turns the whole movie on its head. That's that is is at least notable for that. It's that kind of stereotypical tale of like love gone crazed, but it's not even really that. And again, the twist makes it something maybe crazier than what you're thinking when you start watching it. So
okay,
it's certainly worth a look if you're into especially into true crime docs like that. It's
nice.
It's pretty solid. So maybe check that one out too.
Nice. That's Lover, Stalker, Killer. It is currently on Netflix. Nice. Well, Joe, that'll bring us to the end of episode 417 of the Obsessive Viewer podcast. Right. Thank you so much for joining me for the secondary review. Super glad to have you on the show. And, Brent, if you're listening, thank you for joining me for the first half of this episode that has totally been recorded already and not out of order.
He was terrific. Yeah. He was great.
Oh, absolutely. Our review of Drive-Away Dolls is one of the best I've ever done. Monolith not included.
I could have participated in this also. But, I had things happening this week.
So thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be back next week. Tiny and I are going to be reviewing Dune Part 2, and the secondary review of that will be for Spaceman. So that'll be coming out on March 7th. Once again, check out patreon.com/obsessiveviewer for a ton of stuff there. And also check out Joe's work on MidwestFilmJournal.com, and also check out the Medium Cool Movie Podcast. Lot of good stuff there. Once again, Joe, thank you so much for joining me, and and thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot.
And now, enjoy this short clip from our Patreon exclusive feed. For this and more exclusive content, join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And I just love that this is how the show is exploring that sense of guilt that Hugh has, while also still concealing from us what actually happened. Like, what is the cause of him abandoning his children in an effort to save them from whatever is at Hill House, which I think is, again, another case of brilliant storytelling in that. Thank you for listening to the Obsessive Viewer podcast. This episode was produced and edited by me, Matt Hurt. If you have feedback, thoughts on our reviews, or just want to connect, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. For more information on all of our shows, including a full archive of our episodes and show notes, plus plenty of written reviews, visit obsessiveviewer.com. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a follow on social media and subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. Also, consider rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible to help increase our visibility and help grow our community. If you want to support the show and help keep us going while getting early access to new episodes as well as a steady stream of exclusive content, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Our theme song is A Little Mad Sometimes by As Good As It Gets. For more of their music, check them out on Spotify and at asgoodasitgetsmusic.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.